Chapter 151. Mammons Legacy 3. Kangsuk Chicken Delivery Man is here. Go get it, Yong-ho heard a husky voice over the speakerphone. He waited for the front door to open, manipulating the card reader that he handled after a long time. Catalina flapped her invisible tail behind his back. Shortly afterward, the front door opened, and a handsome and strong young man appeared. Although it was midwinter, he was wearing short-sleeve shirts and shorts. Hello. The chicken's price is 13W111. As soon as the door was opened, the young man, who spoke in a friendly manner, took a card out of his wallet. This man, whose name must be Kangsuk, as heard over the speakerphone, was dumbfounded. He looked at Catalina over Yong-ho's shoulder blankly. Yong-ho turned up his mouth slightly again. He skillfully manipulated the card reader after receiving it from the man. Then he gave the chicken bag and the card to the man who was still resting his dreamy eyes on her. Enjoy, thanks, goodbye. At that moment, the man came to his senses and returned Yong-ho's greetings with a smile. He wistfully looked at her again, but he closed the door in no time. It looks like he had a crush on you. When Yong-ho whispered, getting on the elevator, Catalina slightly narrowed her eyes. She said in a very serious voice, "He is obviously a fragile human being, but he looks unusual. Maybe he has great potential." By evolving several times, she came to cultivate a great sense of discernment. So, given her statement, it seemed that the man was really a man of unusual strength. I wish I had examined him more closely, something like his manner. However, Yong-ho already left the man's house, who was only a young man in his 20s that ordered chicken. Since the man didn't inherit the blood of the Demon King like him, Yong-ho didn't have to care much. Yong-ho climbed on the motorcycle again. A stream of news was appearing on the large outdoor monitor of the broadcasting station across the street. Recently, there are more and more people going into a coma while playing online games. This is happening in several games, not any specific game. For this reason, experts present various views on it. Most experts point out various harms such as addiction to online games, but some experts have completely different opinions. Reporter Chwiryong Jeon is going to report in detail. Reporter Jeon, the sound of the broadcast news faded away. Yong-ho went out for 7 more deliveries after that, and it wasn't until 11 o'clock at night that he could meet his father at home. Fortunately, his father closed the store earlier than usual. His father sat down on the floor of the main bedroom and asked Yong-ho and Catalina to sit down. He listened to his son's story relatively calmly. Yong-ho did not make the mistake of telling him honestly what he had suffered. Not only did he skip anything about the battles, but also he greatly glorified the condition of the House of Mammon. He didn't want to make his father worry about him uselessly. After hearing all of his son's story, his father let out a heavy sigh and looked at his son and Catalina alternately. Shaking his head in no time, he said in a low voice, "Dang it, I should have been there." He almost murmured to himself, which made Yong-ho smile. It befitted his typical reaction. As if he said it as a joke, his father also giggled. "Anyway, you solved my long-cherished wish instead. I would like to congratulate you on becoming a Demon King. Is it okay for me to celebrate you? I don't think there is somebody like a warrior in the demon world." Right, Yong-ho barely held the urge to laugh at the word long-cherished wish. As expected, it was not Yong-ho alone who had delusions when he came to find out the secret of his family. Come to think of it, adjusting his posture, Yong-ho looked at his father. Then he triggered the power of evolution right away. Name: Chwiryong, male. Race: human. Property: individual. Nature: smart, whimsical, sly. Individual aptitude: intellect, stamina. After all, like father, like son, Yong-ho, who laughed at his slyness first, let out a mixed and subtle sigh. It wasn't because of his father's extremely low stats. In fact, he could evolve his father quickly even without collecting evolution. EXP. Is he the same grade as a skeleton worker? After all, his father was as good as a human being. What Yong-ho could evolve with the power of evolution was only those who had a certain level of relationship with him. Only then could he make them his dungeon spirits and evolve them. However, Chwiryong was different. He was Yong-ho's father. He could evolve his father even without making him his dungeon spirit. "Daddy, close your eyes and stay still. It'll do something good for you. Your eyes are glittering so intensely, I don't think I need a flashlight in case of a blackout. You're different from me, because I am a real demon king." When Young-ho approached him, chattering lightly, his father looked somewhat anxious, but he soon closed his eyes. Young-ho put his hand on his shoulders and activated the power of evolution. Oh my. When Young-ho chose the specialization of his physical strength, he got the expected results. His father wasn't as much rejuvenated as Eligos, but that was enough. Not only the fine wrinkles around his eyes have disappeared, but his build has grown stronger than before. He doesn't have a horn yet. Young-ho thought about goblins for a moment, then shook his head quickly. He felt he should not think about more than now. Regardless of his son's reaction, Chwiryong was amazed by his thick arm muscles. Then he glanced at Catalina, who was smiling softly, as if she enjoyed watching them all along. He told Young-ho again, "Son, I have something for you too. It's a family treasure that I was going to pass on to you someday. I think now is the time." After telling him about it directly, his father opened a small safe inside a chest. He pulled out a box the size of his palm and presented it to his son. "This is our family treasure. According to our ancestors, it is said to be the object of the man, the very demon king whose blood is flowing in our family members. According to him, this had been kept for over 1,000 years. It's a mysterious item. It looks like an ordinary antique, but it certainly has some power. Over the past 1,000 years, our family lost this item several times, but it was handed back to our family in one way or another, I hear." Then he opened the lid of the box. There was a black, round metal plate inside the box. Young-ho had never seen it before. However, Catalina's expression changed. A smile disappeared from Young-ho's face. It was composed of a metal plate. God's metal. Brigada reacted to Young-ho's mana. It shined brightly on its own. The fragments of memories that had been kept for over 1,000 years were just revealed. He was holding a woman in his arms. The woman with dark hair and purple eyes was by no means ordinary, but he didn't care. Although the woman was considered alien to humans in this world, she was just a woman to him. She was beautiful, wise, and kind, and she loved him above all. That was enough. He himself. He blinked his eyes. The woman disappeared. He saw a man covered in a lion's skin, so heavy and tall, the man was meeting her eye level even when he sat down. The man said something to her, which made sense. Unlike his savage appearance, the man was always rational. The man wasn't eloquent, but she nodded at the man's short but powerful words. But in the end, she didn't follow the man's words. The man wasn't angry. He sighed once, as if he also expected things would end up like this. As always, the man stood up. The man took a few steps again. The surroundings changed completely. Two women stood far away. They stood side by side. Then one of them was hugging the other, but their expressions were different. The blonde woman, who covered her eyes with red leather, was angered by the red-haired woman who kept trying to stick to her, but the woman didn't push her away. The red-haired woman smiled brightly at the blonde woman. She pretended to be extremely friendly to that blonde woman. It was a familiar scene. When he covered his eyes, more things came to his mind and disappeared again. What appeared lastly was a red-skinned man and a woman with watery hair. The red-haired man's head had a horn like a bull's. He said something, holding the woman's waist tightly. It was what he used to say, something like, "I would follow you wherever you go." This time, again, she nodded. But she did the same to the man wearing the lion skin. He could not accept it. He could not allow her to share his last moment. He turned around. There was an endless staircase under the blue sky. He looked down from there. Their images overlapped, and their visions were mixed. Young-ho looked up from the bottom of the stairs at the man who was introduced as he himself a moment ago. "Hello, Mammon." There came out a voice, unwittingly. The man on the stairs, Mammon, the king of greed, smiled brightly. Instead of looking down from above, he flopped down on the stairs. Young-ho instinctively felt that this was not a conversation. It was a unilateral notification. Those standing there now were the same illusions until now. Mammon rested his chin on his hand. Two large horns replaced his crown. The rest of the horns were hidden, so it was not known how many horns he had originally. It was an illusion. Obviously, it was no more than an illusion. However, there were mixed feelings reflected in Mammon's eyes, something like affection or kindness. The fact that I'm facing you here means that you are special among my descendants. You're a special guy who not only has the power of greed, but also comes from an alien world. I wonder how many years passed after I died until you were born. I'm also curious about how much you resemble your founding grandma, Yon. I wonder if I can find any trace of your resemblance to Yon, since your blood has been mixed for numerous generations. The woman with black hair and purple eyes. Mammon took his hand off his chin with a regrettable expression. Unfortunately, you are still not qualified. I'm afraid I can tell you everything, but it looks like it won't be long before I will lower the bar for qualifications. Yong Ho wanted to ask what the heck he was talking about, but he couldn't say anything. He could not even climb the stairs. He just got fixated on the spot, and Mammon stood up and opened his arms. Boy, keep this in mind. I have always been faithful to my desires. That's why I do not regret my choice at all. That was why he did not listen to the man in the lion's skin or Gussian. He rejected Skathak's wish because he loved her. He didn't need to share his last moment with her, boy, the new king of greed. I hope you can do the same. Chapter 152, Mammon's Legacy. 4. Mammon smiled. Seeing his smile, Yong Ho had no choice but to accept his advice. Mammon turned and slowly climbed the stairs. He moved on with Yong Ho gazing at him from behind. Looking at his back, Yong Ho raised his head a little more. He looked up to the sky at the end of the stairs, and he realized that the sky was not in the demon world or in the human world. It was something different. Darkness captured the light. Yong Ho opened his eyelid. Cough, he gasped for breath. When he opened his eyes urgently, he saw his father thrown into confusion. He could hear Catalina's voice, too. Master Yong Ho felt heartsick. Losing his balance at the moment, he quickly reached out and touched the ground. Catalina hugged his waist. His jacket was taken off. Or rather, it was torn apart. A metal plate that was split into dozens of pieces was attached to his left chest like a tattoo. Like a wound from a beast's claw, it was long and reached down to his side. It didn't hurt. Rather, he felt fresh. He felt like he got a big load off his chest. He naturally closed his eyes. He felt greedy. His greed ate something new. He could do what he couldn't do before. The power of attribute. Something he devoured but could not make his own. Greed awakened Agare's lightning again. The earth, which was the attribute of the landworm, also woke up after lightning. He felt the light and darkness one after another. The earth, fire, wind, water, lightning, light and darkness, called the 7 great attributes, all radiated their own light inside greed. Their strength and weakness existed. However, everything empowered him. Even those things other than the 7 great attributes could now be called his attributes. Yong Ho opened his eyes again and reserved his stronger greed. Then he smiled with an effort at his father and Catalina, who was wearing a worried expression, to try to calm them down. "I'm okay. Are you really okay? Doesn't it hurt?" Yes, I'm fine. Mammon's purpose was twofold, namely passing down memories and reinforcing greed. Of the two, passing down memories was incomplete. However, only reinforcing greed was done properly. I feel like I've learned how to deal with greed. It was the kind of know-how that he could obtain only after dealing with the power of greed for a long time. He felt he obtained it. He even felt greed and his own will were united into one. Yong Ho carefully pushed Catalina aside and changed the way he was sitting. Watching his son quietly, his father let out a sigh, as if he felt relaxed. "Well, I think it's true that the Demon King's blood is flowing in our family. The devil's blood is also flowing," Yong Ho said abruptly. One of the transferred memories naturally came out. "Our ancestors, I mean the woman who married Mammon and gave birth to our ancestors. She wasn't pure human, but half human and half demon. She was sort of a 9-tailed fox, and her name was Yon." Catalina, who didn't know what a 9-tailed fox was, blinked with a confused look. His father, who was dumbfounded for a moment, soon regained his composure and said, "It's unconventional, but it's a secret of our birth that isn't particularly surprising. Anyway, it happened 1,000 years ago, and those born at that time were also the very distant ancestors of Yong Ho's family." Yong Ho also nodded at the new fact about his ancestors. The descendants of the Demon King, or the descendants of the Demon King and the half-demon were the same. Anyway, Xiong's family was mixed with lots of human blood for 1,000 years. The legacy inherited from generation to generation for 1,000 years was now in Yong-ho's heart. Moreover, it was unlikely that he would remove it. His father stood up, slightly glancing at the clock on the wall. He told Yong-ho and Catalina, who were about to stand up simultaneously, "It's so dark outside. Go to sleep. I have made the bed for you in your room, Daddy." His father passed by his son and opened the door of the main bedroom. It seemed that he planned to show him to the room in person. After all, Yong-ho also hurriedly stood up. Catalina also came out with the two into the living room. However, the way his father acted was a bit weird. Instead of heading to Yong-ho's room, his father headed toward the front door. On the way, he didn't forget to put on the coat on the sofa in the living room. "Let me go out for a drink. I'm probably coming back late tomorrow morning." Pardon, what the heck was he talking about? How could he get out when his son returned home in several months? Was he going out for a drink with somebody at this time? When he was at a loss about what to do, his father clicked his tongue. Then he winked at Yong-ho and left quickly. Before following his father, Yong-ho recalled his last glance at him. Then he naturally understood what his father signaled to him. He gulped before he knew it, and turned quickly. Instead of taking care of Catalina, who was also embarrassed, Yong-ho opened the door of his room. There were 2 pillows, but 1 blanket in the middle of the room. He could immediately understand what it meant. Both blushed and gulped at the same time. It was dark and quiet. Even though he kept a thick cotton blanket on, he felt like he could hear his heartbeat. He gasped for breath, though briefly. Without even closing his eyes, he just stared at the ceiling. In fact, there was nothing special about it. It wasn't the first time he laid on the floor side by side with Catalina like this. Didn't he sleep with her on the floor like this for a few days after becoming the master of the house? No, it's different. How can it be the same this time? Yes, that was true. This time, the situation was too different. It was definitely not the same as the previous situation. First of all, there was no Eligos, there was no Lucia. There wasn't even Ophelia, who could open the door anytime and disturb them. Even Armand didn't respond as usual. It was as if Amon fell asleep, Catalimast. The two blurred at the same time before stopping. In extreme tension, he squeezed his voice. "You go first." "You first, master." Even this time, they talked at the same time. Their voices couldn't mix in the air and shattered. He closed his eyes tightly in a tense situation that made him so nervous and excited. He caught his breath to pluck up courage. At that moment, there was something that touched his fingertips. It was her hand, that he held not only today, but also several times in the past. But her touch was special this time. Her hand just touched his fingertips, but he felt like his chemistry with her was electrifying. He didn't know if he moved first, or Catalina did it first, but suddenly, their hands touched each other. Naturally, they interlocked their fingers. "Remember my wish for you. It's still valid, right?" she said when he opened his eyes. Although she stuttered, she said it clearly. He turned his head to the side. Lying on her side, she was looking at him with her ears drooping. He did not move. She carefully stretched out one of her hands that didn't touch him. She had her face close to him. This time, she closed her eyes again. He could hear her breathing. Then she kissed him. Her shy kissing did not end there. She felt like her tongue melted. Her heart was beating wildly, as if it was going to burst at any moment. The saliva she tasted for the first time was so sweet. "You're so good at kissing." He was embarrassed. Her kiss was clearly clumsy. But it was really fascinating. Since it was her first time kissing him, it was funny for him to question if it was good or bad, but he was convinced that she kissed well. Her kiss reminded him that she was a half succubus. Her breathing, which paused for a moment, continued again. Her sweet breathing touched his lips. Gently opening his eyes, he gulped again before he knew it. He looked at her blushing cheeks and her eyes, wondering about what to do, curling up her body because she was shy. She looked so lovely to him. He naturally caressed her cheeks, which were hot. He smiled, and she slightly curled her lips. Her ears that drooped got stiff, as if she was tense. He then touched his ears and kissed her once again. Yong-ho's father returned home around lunchtime the next day. His son, whose mind he read so well, was comfortably sitting on the sofa in the living room. His son looked so peaceful and relaxed, as if he owned the whole world. He winked at his son like he did last night, who was smiling at him like a man. This time, Yong-ho opened his mouth first. Daddy, are you not going to open the shop today? The store is closed temporarily. Have you forgotten telling me you are going back tomorrow? Yesterday, the store was already open, and there were customers, so he could not forcibly close it. But he could close it today. Catalina, who usually slept late in the morning, woke up much later today. Feeling a bit awkward, Yong-ho prepared lunch. Usually, there were only 2 at the dining table, but today there were 3 after a long time. Another dreamlike day passed. Packing lots of stuff to take to the demon world, Yong-ho tore the scroll to create a new twist. When he sent a signal to the House of Mammon, a large door of space was formed from the twist, "I will come back again." He couldn't go with his father. It wasn't time yet. It was highly likely that a new war would break out in the demon world. His father tapped Yong-ho on the shoulder. He didn't feel sorry for his son, who didn't talk about going with him. "Son, as always, I respect your choice. So, behave yourself well. Don't get hit by anybody. Got it?" He winked with one eye. At that moment, Yong-ho knew it. His father already noticed that what his son said was not true, and that the demon world was by no means a peaceful and safe place. After all, Yong-ho couldn't deceive his father. His father could discern everything about him by merely looking at his gaze. It was possible because he was his father and parent. His father slapped him on the shoulder. Instead of holding him in his arms, his father took a step back and increased the distance between them. "Go back now." "Yes, Dad." Yong-ho smiled at him. Catalina moved up and down her lips to say goodbye but gave up. She returned his goodbye by bowing to him. His father also smiled. Beckoning to him to hurry up, Yong-ho held her hand. He gave his father a slight nod for the last time and threw himself into the door of space. Standing still, his father watched him going back. Even after the door of space was closed and the twisting completely disappeared, he stood there for a while, then turned around. "The Demon King's blood is flowing in our family." It had only been 4 years since he said it to Yong-ho. His father left his son's room. His blue eyes glittered intensely after a long time. He closed the door with an awkward smile. It was time for him to open the store. Chapter 153, Preparation 1. Embryo was dead. The meaning of his death in the southern area was extraordinary. He was the most powerful master in the southern area, and also the most belligerent. Few thought that Embryo's death would mean the end of the war. His death was likely only the beginning of a new war, because of his risky ambitions during his lifetime. In the worst case, the entire southern area could be in unprecedented turbulence like a carriage without the horsemen. Everyone in the southern area was all on edge. Embryo's remnants were seeking a way to survive, and the masters of houses in the eastern area were restless because of the power of the new master of the house of Mammon. It wasn't the masters of houses that suffered the most when war broke out. The ordinary people, who were destined to be sacrificed in the war, kept being anxious about their future. However, all of this only mirrored the situation of the southern area, Embryo's death. From the perspective of the whole demon world, it was not a big event. It could be rightly called a storm in a teacup. The king of gluttony thought it should be called like that, and intended to make it a minor event. The king raised his unusually large arm to enjoy dinner. A glutton as well as a gourmet, he ate, drank, and devised how to start a war. At last, a war broke out. The king of pride finally advanced his army toward the territory of the king of envy. Since the former declared a war, befitting his grandiose ambitions, nobody believed the current war would end up being a small local war like before. It was an all-out war. An all-out war among the kings who had sin and godly energy. The king of gluttony was eating food more quickly. Rakshasas, who had been kidnapped from the king of Furious territory, hastily brought new food to him. Gandharbas, the beautiful girls and musicians for him, also played faster music to the pace of his eating. The king of gluttony came from a lowly devil, a small and fragile demon often eaten as snacks by large monsters such as ogres or trolls. As a result, the king of gluttony knew his limits. Unlike other kings, who were noble from birth, he knew how to endure and stick it out. The king of pride was certainly strong. Probably, he was the strongest of the current 6 kings. But the king of envy was also as tough as him. He was the oldest king, along with the king of lust. He was a living legend that lived during the same era as Mammon, the great king of greed. The fight between the two was unlikely to end quickly, so the King of Gluttony had to make the most of it. Mainly, he wanted to control information and minimize several facts about Embryo's death. The Bone Dragon. Its power was only the delusion of the wanderers who fled the battlefield. Its power was greatly exaggerated in the process of its rumors spreading everywhere. It was more of an undead wyvern. That was the right title for the dragon, and it would soon turn out true. The kings were not supposed to have any interest in the southern area. They had to look to the north only. The King of Gluttony himself was thinking of pretending to do so. He already deployed his troops on the northern and western borders. He would attack the southern area only after his battle with the northern area escalated enough. It was when all the kings got the south out of their minds when it was time for him to occupy the south, the master of the House of Mammon. His performance on the battlefield was impressive to the King of Gluttony. He could not obtain detailed information about the master because the mole he placed to watch Embryo was killed, but his defeat of Embryo as well as the Bone Dragon and the situation of the battle he grasped indirectly through the eyes of the crow were enough to confirm that the master was very powerful. The sudden emergence of a powerful master in the southern area. It wasn't impossible, it was really possible. But what if it was not true? What if the master, like the King of Gluttony, came from a low birth? More than 1,000 years had passed since the sin of greed disappeared. The King of Gluttony began to move his hand again and devoured the food in front of him. The power of experience was great. Young-ho's second movement between the two worlds was much better than his first one. Instead of sitting down, he stood upright and met the dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon, who came out to welcome him back. Welcome back. Just as she did when he left, Chwiryong greeted him on behalf of them. Young-ho put down packages on both hands and stroked her head. Chwiryong wasn't the only one to welcome him back cutely. I earnestly waited for you to come back. Welcome back, master. How was your trip to your hometown? Lucia, who was talking to him cheerfully, suddenly raised her voice. Startled, Young-ho raised his head. Chwiryong, as well as other dungeon spirits, looked at him, embarrassed. Lucia shouted again. There is something different about you. Seriously, something different about you. Oh, no. Mim, sorry, I haven't protected you. Sob. I should have seen it. What Lucia said last was the most important. Young-ho, who smiled awkwardly in embarrassment, sharply looked at Lucia, and she giggled as if she deliberately cracked a joke. Ha, our master has become a man. You have lost your purity, but that's your other charm. As you have been breathed on, why don't you decide to be a bad man from now on? Young-ho narrowed his eyes even more. He even doubted that Lucia was talking to someone else, not him. Her use of vocabulary was getting more lively day by day. Stop joking now. After whispering to her, he took his hand off Chwiryong and looked at other dungeon spirits. An unexpected person was standing among them, Ophelia. I, Ophelia, Enderion's daughter, am happy to meet you, master of the Mammon family. I briefly stopped by before heading to the Free City. Unlike Chwiryong, who greeted awkwardly, Ophelia greeted him professionally, rolling her eyes quietly. Catalina, who was standing blankly behind him, looked at her. Her moaning had mixed meanings. Catalina let her ears droop and curled her lips when she found Ophelia's sharp glance. Eventually, she lowered his head, blushing. Ophelia grinned and told him, who was a bit embarrassed like Catalina, "It seems like you had a great and rewarding vacation out there. Congratulations." Her statement was as significant as her gaze. Although Ophelia was not as good as his father in terms of discernment, Young-ho found it hard to hide his sleeping with Catalina from her, so he just chuckled. Salami, lying on the floor at some distance, shook its head at Young-ho's reaction. "You've brought lots of stuff here. Can you tell me what they are?" asked Ophelia. Ophelia, one of the good dungeon spirit models, did not put her master in trouble. She changed the topic appropriately. "So," he replied right away, "well, I don't want to see you empty-handed. So, I've brought a motley of stuff." Indeed, the baggage was full of various stuff. Since they were extraordinarily strong, Young-ho and Catalina could bring them. The baggage was heavy enough for 4 or 5 adults to carry. Chwiryong, who was closest to Young-ho, also showed interest in the baggage. She didn't flap her tail or ears like Catalina, but 2 strands of her hair that protruded like antennae were cutely flapping instead. Baduk, sitting next to Uriah, also sniffed its nose. It seemed that Baduk was trying to prove his smelling power like a dog. All right, look at this, Uriah. This is a chicken. Yong-ho did not delay opening the baggage. He opened one of the paper boxes on the top of the baggage and showed them the savory seasoned chicken. It was fried chicken prepared by his father passionately for the dungeon spirits of his son and the House of Mammon. There was no chicken as a dish in the demon world, but there were creatures that almost looked like chicken. Uriah and Baduk instinctively realized that what he took out was meat. Baduk already started to drool. Uriah also drooled over it. Yong-ho did not stall for time. He immediately wrapped a chicken leg in a piece of paper and gave it to Uriah. Thanks for the chicken. After thanking him first as she learned, Uriah bit the chicken leg. Then she made an expression she had never made before. Her expression was ecstasy itself. This time, Baduk was drooling profusely over it. Yong-ho handed a piece of chicken to Baduk and observed it happily. He was not sure about their eating culture in the whole demon world, but there was one thing that he could confirm at least within the southern area. The dietary culture in the southern area didn't develop very much. All meat was grilled or boiled raw, and most vegetables were eaten raw or boiled in water. It was the same for the bread made from grain. However, pancakes made with eggs were among the most delicious foods. Of course, even in the southern part of the country, there was something called splendid dishes. For example, Ophelia's tavern sold some quite delicious dishes, but it was hard to say that they were really delicious. The average taste was so low that they just tasted relatively delicious. The reason why the food culture in the southern area was so undeveloped as to rival British cuisine was because of the food situation there. Since the area was so desolate, they could not properly farm. With nothing around, seafood was also rare, and most of the fruits in the forest were inedible. In a word, food was rare there. It was impossible for them to develop food in this situation. They didn't have enough food to eat right now. So how could they study something like cuisine? It was all thanks to the dungeon market that cooking in the southern area was developed as much as it was now. If the dungeon market had not supplied them with basic food at low prices, the population in the southern area would have certainly been reduced by half. So, long accustomed to the rustic southern food, these dungeon spirits had the first taste of delicious dishes of modern society. What a difference between cooking for survival and cooking for gourmandism. Chapter 154. Preparation 2. Uriah, who ate a chicken leg right away, was so excited that she was jumping up and down in place. It looked like she wanted to express her feelings but couldn't think of the right words. Baduk was chewing on even the chicken bones beside Uriah. Since the two showed such a fantastic response, other dungeon spirits who gathered near the door of space, watching the two eating carefully, showed deep interest. They were already drooling because of the delicious smell of the chicken. Yong-ho served a piece of chicken to one of the dungeon spirits that pretended to be the most indifferent. She was none other than Ophelia. "Hey, Ophelia, try it!" It's delicious. Ophelia received one and took a bite of it gracefully. Catalina held the urge to laugh hard while watching her. She then flapped her ears in no time because she saw Ophelia's tails wagging violently. "Isn't it delicious?" Yeah, I have to admit it." Ophelia held the urge to take one more bite as much as possible. In fact, she was the hostess of a tavern nearby, which could be called the best restaurant in the area. So, she didn't want to show them she was making a big fuss over the food. Although she wasn't honest, Yong-ho was satisfied because he also noticed her tail wagging fervently even without Catalina signaling to him with her eyes. Yong-ho opened a few more chicken boxes and handed them out to those dungeon spirits that gathered near the door of space. While everyone was enjoying the chicken happily, Treyant, which couldn't eat food, let its branches droop with a long face. "Let me tell you what I have brought here." Ophelia, who secretly packed a box for Eligos, turned around in embarrassment. Instead of embarrassing her, Yong-ho naturally pointed to the box stacked right under the chicken. "This is Coke. It's a soft drink. It's really the best if you drink it cold." Yong-ho just felt good just by looking at it. But Ophelia was a little different. She blinked her eyes several times and asked in a cautious tone, Master, did you bring only something to eat?" "So what?" Ophelia's pretty eyebrows frowned a bit. He heartily laughed at her gaze that reflected regret and a little bit of patheticness. "In kidding, of course. He removed the boxes of clothes he bought for some dungeon spirits such as Catalina, Urea, and Ophelia. He then pointed to the things laid under them. There were stacks of large bags. I bought some seeds. Seeds? Do you mean seeds to grow crops? Right? The grains supplied by the dungeon market are okay, but their breed was not improved. These seeds are a better breed you can grow properly in the garden of life. There were potatoes in the human world, and there were similar crops like potatoes in the demon world, but they were different. Potatoes in the demon world were small and tasteless, and they didn't taste as good as those in the human world. It was because of the difference in crop breeding. Potatoes in the human world were improved in a way that they became bigger, more delicious, and more productive. Compared with wild corn that didn't go through crop breeding with the corn grown on a farm, grains of the latter were 10 times as many as the former. All the crops supplied by the dungeon market couldn't be called wild crops, but they were inferior to their counterparts in the human world. That was why Yong-ho brought the seeds. The garden of life was not just fertile land. There was an aura of growth promotion that originated in Scathak's vitality, whose amount would make it possible to collect several times as many seeds within a few months. And these are books on farming. I've also brought some cookbooks. Although Ophelia did not know the human characters, she could roughly guess what kind of information was in it. After admiring the excellent binding of the books and the printing method, she agreed with his opinion. If we can provide delicious meals of excellent quality, the morale of dungeon spirits will go up greatly. After all of them are working to eat. Moreover, the pleasure of eating was very important in the demon world, where there were few dishes to enjoy. It was far from the situation where in the army soldiers paid lots of attention to the taste of combat food, except for chicken, coke, and a few favorite items. It was no exaggeration to say that virtually all of the items in Yong-ho's baggage were agricultural products. Since his visit to the human world was made so suddenly, and his stay there was so brief, he could not afford to buy other stuff. Yong-ho felt it rather awkward to bring out clothes for Urea and Ophelia, lastly in the presence of other dungeon spirits, so he changed the topic. How have you been here? Didn't anything else happen while I wasn't here? Restoring their strength is going on well. Brother Eli and Skull are returning to the House of Mammon with the Skull unit. Maybe they will arrive by tomorrow morning. They started late because they were wounded, but they are all in good shape now. You don't have to worry. Ophelia paused for a moment, then continued after catching her breath. The House of Randalt has stabilized again under Tigrius' command. I'm going to go back to the Free City tomorrow, and the bones of the Bone Dragon have been stored safely in the warehouse. Bergrim is so anxious to work on his dream right now. Listening to her briefing quietly, Yong-ho opened his eyes wide and asked, Bergrim is just looking at them now. Yes, since the bones of the Bone Dragon are a valuable asset, it is impossible for Bergrim to tamper with them without your permission. Cutting him off, she related the rest of her briefing to him. A battle between the runaway soldiers seems to have broken out in the west, as expected. I guess refugees from the west will come in a few days. In the case of the north and the east, sorry I have not yet gathered intelligence about the situation there. However, I think those in the east will have heard about Embryo's death by now. So, I think they will have to choose whether to attack the southern area or defend their own land by the day after tomorrow at the latest. Don't worry. They are far away from us anyway. What about the remnant soldiers? Those runaway soldiers who fled to the south were not engaged in any suspicious activities yet. Contrary to our concerns, Demon King Lotus of the wild animals seems to have moved westward. The situation was very favorable for Yong-ho. It seemed that he didn't have to worry about them at this point. June, take the remaining chicken to the restaurant and hand it out to other dungeon spirits, and move all other packages to my room. June, the only female goblin ranger, who was playing the role of Butler Eligos, bowed to him and followed his order. John, Ron, and Yon moved with Jun like they were one. Although there were 3 helping her, they acted in perfect unison. Master, you must have been very tired from your journey. Are you going to move around right away? When Lucia quickly asked quick-wittedly, Young-ho replied in a low voice, You know, I had a good rest for 2 days, and it seems that there are a lot who have been waiting for my return anxiously for the 2 days I was away. He recalled several of them in his mind. Catalina approached him, leaning toward him. She, who had a deeper bond with him than ordinary dungeon spirits, asked, Which one would you want to see first? Well, let me think about it. I guess she's going to wait for me more earnestly. He beat around the bush, but Catalina instantly knew who she was, for they could understand each other's intention just by looking at their eyes. Catalina curled her lips slightly when he mentioned that woman. I was worried that the power of your anguish would disappear. I think my concern was unfounded. The power of your anguish has become stronger. Yong-ho was standing in the middle of the arena. There was no enemy on the other side. There was the wreckage of the 13th floor floormaster, giant war golem, scattered everywhere after being completely shattered. The instant opening of his mana, which could be better called explosion, was far from simple. Mana released by Yong-ho was always different. Depending on the color and properties of the opponent's mana, he brought out the opposite. Yong-ho himself possessed only 3 attributes: flame, chill, and lightning. But the mana he released during battle was much more diverse. Not only Catalina's darkness, but also Eligos land and Ophelius wind were added to his strength. Amon did not hide his satisfaction. Yong-ho became stronger. His spearmanship made a lot of progress, so he really looked like a master spearman. Your previous anguish had a mix of shame, inferiority, and anger. Today. But now it is different. It is a purer desire. You have the desire to have more and the confidence in having more. Indeed, such desire can be said to fit your greed. My little master, desire. I am proud of you since you are faithful to your desires. Obviously, Amon praised him, but he didn't feel like that. Ah, please, Yong-ho wished Amon didn't mention it in a serious voice like that. He swung Amon briskly and turned the spear into a bracelet, then hurriedly fanned himself with his hand. After taking off heat from his face to some extent, he took Mammon's mana and the rewards of the arena. Mammon's mana tasted delicious. Perhaps, thanks to the growth in his ability to utilize greed, the efficiency rate of him absorbing mana also improved. The reward is usually good. It was a ring that improved the concentration of magic casters. He felt he had better give it to Tigrius. When Yong-ho turned after wrapping up, Catalina, who was waiting in the audience, stood up suddenly and clapped her hands. Yong-ho felt satisfied with her reaction. Oh my. Look at her turning up her mouth with joy, said Gusion. Instead of responding right away, Yong-ho used Catalina's black mana as Brigada. Then something amazing happened. Chapter 55, Preparation 3. Yong-ho jumped more than 20 meters with just 1 foot roll. He jumped so high that it seemed like he was flying. Its principle was simple. The moment he kicked off the ground, the black mana released from his legs propelled him off the ground strongly. Landing right in front of Catalina, he reached out and hugged her waist. Once again, using black mana, he stood in front of Gusion. This time, his action was completely different from showing off his Herculean power. Only the one who could use black mana freely could make such a gentle jump. Moreover, Yong-ho performed the same tricks as before, with the mana of his dungeon spirit he brought out through Brigada, not his own mana. Hey, you can do something extraordinary. You seem to have become too strong suddenly, don't you, sighed Gusion, laughing loudly. Snorting at him, he let go of Catalina. Then he flopped down across from Gusion. Stop eating, man, I've brought it here for Catalina. Are you going to eat it all? Hey, don't blame me for eating. Actually, I've got one left for her. I know you are the king of greed, so don't be mean to me. They exchanged barbed words, but they just did it jokingly. Yong-ho looked at the chicken box with a bit of regret on his face. Kaiwan was recuperating in the recovery room of the arena. It was natural that she was still in bed, because she was injured heavily during her fight with Embryo. Don't worry. Even those who are battered by you are up and running once they are discharged from the recovery room. You can see them next time, said Kaiwan. That's good. After replying quickly, Yong-ho caught his breath. After trying to forget her smile that kept popping up in his mind, he faced Gusion. Yong-ho could see his smiling face, which was so familiar to him by now, but at the same time, he could see his face, who was crying and begging. Of course, his second image was an illusion. It was from the memory that he had read from Mammon's legacy in the human world. Mammon didn't tell him everything, saying he wasn't qualified yet. Mammon also said 12 spirits of the House of Mammon, such as Gusion and Skathach, were not ready yet, but he didn't tell Yong-ho the truth about his own death. But it didn't mean that there were no clues at all. Yong-ho could create a single picture, though incomplete, by putting together the fragments one by one. Mammon didn't share his last moment with the 12 spirits. Yong-ho could not know what caused Mammon's death, but he was certain they were not with him during his last moment. At that time, Gusion cried and begged Mammon to allow him to stay with the master until his last moment. Sitri was looking up to the sky, hugging Alune, who was dying. Skathash asked Yong-ho to fight with his dungeon spirits all the time, and Mammon went alone, leaving all of them behind. Mammon died alone. Then, who and what killed him? Why was there no record of his death in history? There was one more question. Why did Mammon's 12 spirits hide the truth from Yong-ho? What were the qualifications Mammon mentioned? Gusion wants to tell me about it, Yong-ho thought to himself. He could feel it. Amon, Skathach, and Sitri hid the secret, but for different reasons. Gusion was holding the urge to tell. On the other hand, Amon and Skathach didn't want to talk from the beginning. Why were they divided about it? Yong-ho remembered Mammon's words. I have always been faithful to my desires. Because of that, I do not regret my choice. That was what Mammon said to him. At first, Yong-ho thought he said it to express his satisfaction, but he came to think differently about it when he reflected on it more. He felt like Mammon was drawing a line between himself and Yong-ho. I hope you can do the same. 2. Go your way, act according to your desires. Don't be bound by Mammon himself. Yong-ho blinked. At that moment, Gusion, in reality not in his memory, was looking at him anxiously and said, Little master, are you feeling ill? Were the wounds you got from embryo infected? No, a little tired, I understand. You broke through 3 floors at once. There were almost very few who challenged the floor recklessly like you after the 10th floor. Kaiwan lost on and on, but finally she continued to challenge persistently and climbed it. There were 7 floors for Yong-ho to challenge before the 20th floor, where Kaiwan lost. Considering the corresponding increase in difficulty, it seemed that he could reach the 19th floor without much difficulty. Come to think of it. Suddenly, he said something that came to his mind, so he asked Gusion, Is there any other floor where they issue a summons on the way to the 19th floor? Gusion answered, Well, I can't guarantee, but you might get one because you will challenge the floor after the 10th floor. Even if they issue a summons, it's not difficult to get you one. By the way, why do you need a summons? Are you going to bring Kaiwan to do something? Gusion accurately read his mind. Yong-ho nodded. In fact, like Gusion pointed out, Yong-ho planned to summon Kaiwan if he could obtain a summons. Well, I want to experiment with one thing. So, he needed Kaiwan only. The situation could be a little different if another previous master of the House of Mammon appeared on his way to the 19th floor, but right now, he couldn't think of any other candidate than Kaiwan. Nodding slowly at his earnest answer, Gusion asked, looking back at Amon, the flames of the red lotus next to him. Amon, is it true that the anguish of our little master is getting stronger? It's getting stronger, but it's a little bit different. It is greed, not lust. Of course, it doesn't mean that there is no lust in it at all. At that moment, Yong-ho shook his hand wildly and stopped Eamon from talking more. Somehow, it seemed that Catalina was making a sullen expression behind his back. Why did Gusion, who usually never cracked a joke, mention it in a situation like this and put him on the spot? Yong-ho, sighing at Amon's gentle laugh, said to Gusion, Deliver the chicken to Kaiwan well with my best regards. Let me go back. He stood up. Gusion saw him off in person. I see. That's why you said you needed my approval. It was really very late when Yong-ho left the arena, but instead of going to the Demon King's room, Yong-ho headed to Bergrim's workshop because he knew well that Bergrim was looking forward to seeing him. On top of Bergrim's workbench was a whole bone almost the size of Catalina. It was part of the ribs of the bone dragon. The bone dragon's bone was definitely a great material. It was hard and light, and it had strong magical energy inside it. Nonetheless, it was bone, not metal. Its processing was not smooth. It was impossible to melt it like metal, then harden it to reshape it. The only way to process a dragon's bones was to drill it. If one ground a bone to make a knife, it was inevitable to discard some bones, and it was almost impossible to utilize all the discarded bones. Of course, dragon bones were also valuable as a magic catalyst, so they were not discarded forever. But the bones required lots of waste in the process of making tools. That was why Bergrim waited for Yong-ho. Only after receiving a specific order and getting his permission to use the amount of bone could Bergrim start working on desire was flaring up in Bergrim's eyes. His eyes were glittering as strongly as when he was longing for the evolution of mana. Yong-ho thought to himself, is it similar to the situation where he obtained an incredible toy in his hand? Yong-ho could not know it. He just giggled at Bergrim and gave him a specific order. Aside from making the dragon soldiers, which could be called high-level skeletons, he had no specific plan about how to use the bones, so he decided to provide Bergrim only one large fang and a few small bones. He thought this would be enough for Bergrim to make weapons and armor for his dungeon spirits. Bergrim started working right away. It seemed that he had no intention of taking a break until he produced the results. Catalina, who came out on the hallway, said with admiration, "He always seems to be passionate whenever I see him." "Yeah, he's completely different from when I saw him the first time, right?" She nodded. When Yong-ho first came to the House of Mammon, Bergrim was languid with his eyes drooping. It wasn't just Bergrim that changed. All the dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon have changed since then. Butler Eligos has changed a lot too, she said with mixed feelings. At that moment, Yong-ho chuckled because he recalled the bleak House of Mammon when he saw it first. John and Ron, the first dungeon spirits that he bought at the dungeon market, were no longer just goblins. It had been a long time since they surpassed ordinary goblins not only in appearance, but also in their abilities. Even if they fight ogres even now, they were highly likely to win. Heading to the Demon King's room with Catalina, he chatted with her. There were almost no dungeon spirits in the hallway because it was so late at night. When they finally reached the room, he heard Lucius' voice. "Master, it's deep at night. Quotes, you have to take a rest now." Yong-ho knitted his brows while Lucia kept talking. Pitter-pat lubbed up. "This time, let me count from 1 to 10. Our connection is getting lost. Master. When did you get this skill? I'll hate you if you disconnect the line with me." Lucia, which was interrupted in the middle of her talking, completely disappeared in the end. Free from her connection, Yong-ho reached out to Catalina, who opened her eyes wide, not knowing what happened. "Let's go. We're going to be busy tomorrow. Time for rest now." That was true. Tomorrow he was going to summon dragon soldiers and evolve dungeon spirits, including Skull. Probably he would use more mana tomorrow than today. Catalina blinked once. She looked back at her room at the entrance of the Demon King's room and smiled differently. Then she said warmly to him, who made an awkward expression, "Sure, master." She held his hands, then naturally stepped into the room of the Demon King. Unlike the southern area where peace was restored, the northern area was on fire. It was the chaos caused by Embryo's death. The eastern army struck the northern army fiercely. Some of the northern soldiers fought a deadly battle, while others gave up too easily, surrendering to the eastern army. Embryo's dungeon was also among those that were ruined and burnt down. It was a small and insignificant dungeon. For this reason, few of the northern army knew that the dungeon burning right now before their eyes was Embryo's. A wolf went out of the burning dungeon. The wolf came out to fulfill his order that he gave before leaving the dungeon. The leader who led the herd of wolves was killed. However, the leader's members weren't killed altogether just because their leader was killed. If a new leader appeared, they could continue to survive as long as they wanted. The wolf carrying Embryo's legacy suddenly left the northern area. The wolf headed south to join the killed leader's runaway soldiers who had followed him. The wolf was the new leader that Embryo had nominated as the new leader just before his death. It was the wolf that Embryo recognized as the king. The moonlight was cloudy. The wolf ran through the dark night. Chapter 156, Libra Elune 1. There was an expansion of fertile land under the sparkling artificial sun. It was the laws of nature that life would be born and would grow. It was not different here. Countless plants sprouted, grew, and bore fruit. It was a scene that one felt warm about just by looking at it. The golden waves of wheat swayed like waves in the wind, and the corns in full ear were shyly wrapped in green leaves. Strawberries and grapes, which would surely smell so sweet in one's mouth with a bite, also showed off their beauty with their own colors. It was beautiful. It was a scene that made one feel the greatness of life and nature, except for a bit of a sense of strangeness. "Don't you think our little master is so mean this time, like he was last time?" Skathak, the immortal witch and the owner of the Garden of Life in charge of healing the 12 spirits of the House of Mammon, frowned. The Garden of Life was full of death. Nearly 50 skeleton soldiers were absorbed in farming with their own farming tools. As they were new to the garden, many of them weren't familiar with farming, but they made up for their clumsy skills through their meticulous and repetitive actions peculiar to the undead. The way that the undead in the realm of death cultivated plants caused Skathak to feel an instinctive sense of strangeness. Moreover, there were more than 50 skeletons in the garden. Similar things were going on in all 4 circular rooms on the first floor. In some rooms, they grew fruit intensively, and in other rooms, they grew preference items such as sugarcane, cacao, and tobacco. The most impressive among them was the room where they grew medicinal materials such as hemp and poppy. The beautiful garden where Skathak healed the visitor's mind and body did not exist anymore. Instead, there were only rice paddies and fields filled with the smell of manure from all directions. Yong-ho, who returned from the human world, increased the number of skeletons a lot. Skeleton workers, who could be called the lowest dungeon spirit, were very cheap. A dragon's single finger bone, which cost less than pure dragon bones, could buy tens of skeleton workers. Yong-ho purchased a total of 200 skeleton workers. There were very few masters of houses who bought as many skeleton workers as he. When Yong-ho recalled Skull when he arrived at the House of Mammon, it was natural that he thought so. Skeleton workers performed very badly. They were weak and slow. Of course, they were good at repetitive work almost without taking any break, but their efficiency was so low that it was hard to regard it as their strength. Besides, their learning ability was also limited. Given these factors, it was questionable whether the unit price of skeletons was really cheap. Nonetheless, Yong-ho purchased skeleton workers in large quantities, for he had some measures to deal with them, unlike an ordinary master of a house. "Oops, sorry, I was nodding off." "What did you say?" Yong-ho, with his whole body buried in the blue liquid, spoke slowly with his eyes half closed. He had shadows under his eyes. On the day he bought the skeleton workers, Yong-ho promoted all of them to skeleton soldiers. They were literally tremendous construction workers. However, with the money to buy 200 skeleton workers, he took advantage of gaining 200 skeleton soldiers. It was a really profitable business, given that he would promote them to skeleton warriors or higher beings later. It was good to have an elite force, but it was also necessary to have as many skeletons as possible. Yong-ho learned and felt a lot while fighting Embryo. From now on, he intended to use the power of evolution more aggressively. Skathak let out a long sigh again after all. Instead of blaming Yong-ho, who looked worn out with fatigue, she turned her eyes at the dragon soldiers that made her feel uncomfortable. She frowned at them again. Unlike typical skeletons, the dragon soldiers were farming by 2s and 3s in a field. They were 7 all told, but each of them was strong enough to be equivalent to 5 or 6 skeleton knights. To convert them into skeleton soldiers, they were worth more than a few hundred. It was really eerie and terrifying to see them, about 2 meters tall, squatting on the field and hoeing clumsily. It was unthinkable for them to be engaged in such manual labor. As dragon soldiers, they were supposed to be proud of themselves. As an undead, they wouldn't disobey their owner's orders, but they could throw tantrums and complain while working. However, the dragon soldiers were busy hoeing hard. It was because another powerful being that could smash their pride at once was also squatting and honing like them. Skull Dragonbone Knight. Its existence itself was different from general dragon soldiers. It was huge. It even gave the aura of grandeur beyond just being huge. Its color was pure white itself. Since it was made from the hardest and sharpest fangs of the dragon's bones, it was slender and sturdy. Its anti-magic resistance was also excellent. It would obviously ignore any typical mana. The purple flame burning in its head, reminiscent of a humanoid or dragon, caused wonder and fear at the same time. It was a great warrior that could confront a Death Knight, arguably the pinnacle of the skeleton warrior series, Skullcull. After murmuring something like, "The sun is so warm, so it's good for me rolling on the floor," Dragonbone Knight got down to hoeing hard again. Skathak murmured, "Come on, it went too far." She felt like that because she witnessed the whole process of Skull being reborn as a Dragonbone Knight. Yong-ho really invested a lot in Skull. So, his efforts to create a dragon soldier to be used for evolving Skull were unusual from the beginning. First of all, he selected the best quality of the dragon's teeth as materials. Then he went through one more process. Instead of simply using the scroll of summoning a dragon soldier as he did for other dragon soldiers. It was Tigrius combination magic. Tigrius, who was summoned from the house of Randolt, used the scroll of summoning a dragon soldier and that of summoning a skeleton mage at the same time, and he combined the two magics with the power of combination magic. Of course, it wasn't easy. Yong-ho didn't use the magic by himself. It was the magic contained in the scroll. Moreover, Tigrius' power itself was weakened after he became Yong-ho's dungeon spirit. Nonetheless, Tigrius finally succeeded. Although he wasted the scroll of summoning a dragon soldier and the scroll of summoning a skeleton mage, his efforts paid off anyway. Thus, a dragon soldier with the power of a skeleton mage was born. This time, Ophelia did her bit. To prevent an emergency, she weakened the ego of the dragon soldier with mental magic. She badly complained about having to kiss a skeleton, but the price she paid for that was very cheap compared to the results. Of course, this was what Yong-ho thought to himself. Finally, Yong-ho activated a combination magic evolution. He was satisfied with the outcome. Just looking at it, he felt like his belly was full even without eating anything. Skull now had a physical strength that surpasses a dragon soldier and a magic ability that surpasses typical combat wizards. The small number of magic spells the Skull could use was somewhat its weakness, but it was still more than enough to be used in battle. Skull had been reborn as a deceptive, all-weather wizard warrior with strong attack power, high defensive abilities that could ignore typical magic but use its own attack magic. Despite that, Skull was hoeing humbly in the field. No matter how powerful it was reborn, Skull was still a Skull. Skathash clicked her tongue, then turned to Yong-ho again. He was half asleep at the moment. She asked, "I know you overworked yourself these days. Did you not sleep at all last night? Tell me honestly. You haven't slept properly for the past several days, right?" Yong-ho flinched at her questioning. Then Lucia cut in, as if she had been waiting for this chance until now. "You're right, Telesh the Skathash, just listen to me. You've got to spread this gossip everywhere. I've got one thing to tell you, to whispering, to whispers." "Oh my God, how indecent!" Skathash screamed with both hands on her cheeks. But Yong-ho shouted, "Lucia, you didn't hear anything except for the whispering, right? I just kept working. That's all, really. Are you sure you just weren't doing nothing else? That's it. You disconnected the communication link with me, who's cute, pretty, poor, and miserable, and just kept working for several days. Are you sure? See, really." As if she was really disappointed in him for the past few days, Lucia pressured him a lot. Burying himself in the blue liquid, he cleared his throat and said, "Well, let me exercise the right to remain silent." He felt it fortunate that Ophelia was not here at the moment. Catalina was asleep, wrapped in blue liquid across from him. If she had been awake and seen this, she would have been very embarrassed. Skathak burst into laughter. After soothing Lucia with kind words, she said, "You've got nothing to be ashamed of. It's natural, and you're the king of greed anyway." Then she lifted his blue, watery eyes and looked a little further away. She continued, "I want to make more money. I want to have a woman. I want to be strong. I want to grow a dungeon. I want to evolve dungeon spirits. All this is greed. There is no such thing as a high or low greed because it's hope and wish. It's what everybody really wants." Staring in the air, she turned her eyes back at him and earnestly said, "Like his mother, greed itself is not bad because it is the driving force of our life and development. So, just desire it as much as you want. Just keep wishing for it. Don't be shy. Your strong wish will be your strength in no time." She made a beautiful and brilliant smile. Yong-ho, who unwittingly looked at her, enchanted with her charming smile, seemed to understand why she had the power of life. Come to think of it, there was something that came to his mind. Chapter 157. Libra Elune 2. Yong-ho asked right away. Skathach was life and Baphomet was death, right? Is the power of the 12 spirits of the House of Mammon like that? Isn't it something like concept, not attributes such as earth, fire, or wind? Skathach clapped her hands to hear it and said, "How discerning you are. You're right. Most of us 12 spirits are using concepts as our power, which can be said to be the result of the intellectual activity of the lives with their own will and emotions. Then, what about Guxian? He asked it instinctively. But the more he thought about Guxian, the more curious he was, because he could not think of any concept that suited Guxian. She waved her hands and said, "Ask him directly. My sweetheart has the power suitable for him perfectly. Ah, it's not something like cuteness. I almost gave you a correct answer. Well, I don't think he isn't even close to cuteness." "Ah, why? You will never know how cute he is when we are alone. So much so that I want to tell others how cute he is," she said, blushing, but he tried not to imagine his being cute to her. He felt goosebumps at the thought that Guxian was acting cute to her when they were together. What is Elun's power? He didn't mention it just to change the topic. Checking it out was important to him because he was planning to start attacking the third floor of the Labyrinth of Greed today. Well, it's the power that suits Elun the most. But at the same time, it is also a very ambiguous force. Depending on who has her power, the strength and weakness of her power will be very different, but I believe you can use her power as well as anybody else. It seemed that she didn't want to answer his question fully. After he got out of the blue liquid, Yong-ho summoned Skull and the dragon soldiers. He also ordered Lucia to call Eligos and Ophelia. About 30 minutes later, Yong-ho was done preparing for the attack and left the Garden of Life. He headed for the Labyrinth of Greed on the third floor, the realm of Elun, Dragon Fear. It was one of the several powers that the descendants of the great Dragon Lord that inherited the vein of fantasy fully. It was an overwhelming power. Its existence itself caused others instinctive fear. Reborn as a Dragonbone Knight, Skull could exert power similar to Dragon Fear. It was a powerful force that could not even be compared with the fear of death that the ordinary undead induced to the living, so much so that a road was opened the moment Skull stepped forward. Wendigos, the dungeon monsters that resembled a monkey, who were in charge of controlling the entrance to the third floor, couldn't even dare to approach Skull's party. The only thing they could do was to scream in anger while shuddering Bucephalus, which was carrying Skull on its back, moved on ostensibly as if he was boasting. Since Bucephalus had been promoted to Nightmare Vanguard after the bloody battle with the Death Knight, his showy marching was quite a view. Looking back once, Bucephalus snorted hard. It seemed meaningless to others, but Salami took it differently. Shaking its head as if it was upset, Salami kept signaling to Yong-ho with its eyes. Yong-ho understood Salami's feelings. That was why he gently got off Salami's back and waved his hand. He looked at Eligos, who was gleaming with a strong desire to win, promoted by Skull's pompous behavior, then gave him a brief order. "Kill them." There were hundreds of Wendigos. But it didn't take long for all of them to collapse. "It looks like the third floor is a gambling hall," said Ophelia, looking around. Since the battle was not over yet, she was still in combat mode, and her voice was more excited than usual because of that. After getting rid of hundreds of Wendigos in the room at the entrance, Yong-ho continued to move inside. Just like the other floors of the Labyrinth of Greed, the third floor was also full of dungeon monsters piled up over 1,000 years, so the battle never ceased. Yong-ho stepped back and watched in order to get the Dungeon Spirit's Evolution EXP. He then looked around like Ophelia. He asked Ophelia puzzlingly, "Did you say this is a gambling place?" The third floor was more like indoor rather than the first or second floor. The first entrance room's ceiling was so high and spacious that Salami could even fly there. But it wasn't after that. There was a series of corridors, so he felt like he entered a large dungeon. Currently, the place where Yong-ho and his party stopped was a space that could be called a gathering place. There was a towering path in the middle of the square-shaped room, and a wide staircase was connected to the floor about 1 meter low. Since the stairs were connected to the whole road, it could be said that the central passage was made of stones stacked in a pyramid shape on the flat ground. Although there were several long grooves in the stone ground, that was it. So he felt like it was a square rather than a gambling hall. Ophelia explained, "It seems to be a traditional slime stadium. Those stairs look like seats, and there are slimes racing along the grooves on the ground. Originally, things like partitions should be stretched along the grooves, but they seem to have been broken with the passage of time. I can see quite a bit of debris around. Probably, they might have bet money over there and got the dividend." She seemed to have a point. Recalling the racetrack he went with his father, he imagined the slimes crawling hard along the rails one after another. They didn't move vigorously, but they look pretty cute, he thought. I found some traces in the room where we first entered, things like dice and gambling chips. Probably they might have gambled at several small tables in that room, just like they did in my tavern. Wasn't the second floor the gateway to the Labyrinth of Greed gambling room right next to the door? Well, they could express their confidence like that because this is no other than the Labyrinth of Greed. And in my opinion, it seems that the third floor is a space to support the entire load. I mean magical load, rather than a physical one. That's why the room or passage is narrower than the first or second floor, and the ceiling is low. In other words, it's a multi-purpose room, right? Yes, I think there is a good chance that a real luxury gambling house was built on a deeper floor. At that very moment, thunder crashed. It was the sound of skull hitting the head of the one-eyed giant standing at the exit with a battle hammer. The head of the giant, nearly 6 meters tall, literally shattered into pieces. Instead of watching Salami and Aligos, who were fighting hard, Yong-ho kept asking Ophelia, by the way, is a gambling room an essential dungeon facility? He asked because the gambling room here was about the size of a racetrack, so he did not understand quickly because she mentioned that high-end gambling place was probably on a deeper floor. She knitted her brows a bit and replied, I told you about it once before, but it is a useful space in many ways. As one of the 12 spirits of the House of Mammon, I would like to strongly recommend that you install it in the Mammon House too. How about a bar there? Just as you're faithful to your desire, the dungeon spirits are also faithful to their own desires. They need a playing area where they can satisfy their desires. Actually, she was right. Unlike young Yuria or Baduk, just content with something to eat, orcs might have various desires. Although the free city was available as a place to satisfy their desires, it was so far away from the House of Mammon. Obviously, they couldn't go that far after their work was over. Although the ratio of undead spirits like skeletons was overwhelmingly high at the House of Mammon, general dungeon spirits also increased a lot in the process of Yong-ho absorbing Free City and the House of Randalt. As the owner of the dungeon, Yong-ho could not help but consider the welfare of the dungeon spirits. What about other masters? I mean, the masters of larger dungeons. Since the masters of dungeons in the southern area, especially the dungeons of those masters affiliated with Yong-ho, were weak, their dungeons were not big. What he wanted to refer to was the dungeons outside the southern area, and the dungeons of powerful masters at that. Ophelia smiled brightly and said, there are many good cases where they build huge estates outside their dungeons. You mean something like a village, right? Yes. Besides, the role of an estate is not just a place to satisfy their desires. It serves as a driving force that can help them control a much larger number of dungeon spirits than a normal dungeon. Aside from the Labyrinth of Greed, it is difficult for thousands or tens of thousands of spirits to live in a typical dungeon. You bet. Right now, the Free City was playing a similar role. It was necessary for Yong-ho to secure a space where a large number of people could stay in order to command thousands of soldiers. Actually, he asked the question casually, so he stopped delving into it further. It would not be too late for him to devise about building an estate after occupying the third floor. While Yong-ho and Ophelia were exchanging opinions, almost all of the dungeon monsters in the slime stadium were wiped out. He looked back at Catalina, who was guarding him as his escort knight, rather than fighting directly because she was smiling at him strangely. Noticing his gaze, she replied quickly, well, I feel the gambling place here looks good because Elune, not anybody else, is in charge. Libra Elune. To quote Scathach's words, she was one of the 12 spirits who was sincere and methodical. Yong-ho also naturally nodded. Her images that he remembered in his memories were far from gambling. She was strict, serious, and stern in everything. Like Catalina said, however, he thought she was a good fit as the manager of the gambling place. Does it mean she ensures fairness in the gambling place? Anybody could trust Elune, and she would not give short weight and short measure anyway. Catalina nodded quickly, saying that it was exactly what she thought. But Ophelia was different, she said with a wicked smile. Well, what I say may sound impertinent, but her presence in the gambling place may be a sophisticated strategy for true deception. After all, a gambling house is a place where the gambling house, not the clients, wins. This was the statement by the former hostess of the tavern, who used to run the largest gambling house in the Free City. Chapter 58, Libra Elune 3. Catalina opened her eyes wide at her statement, while Yong-ho imagined a situation where he, who squandered family fortune at the gambling place, watched Yuria and Baduk crying while lying on the floor. For some reason, Salami was also crying beside them. Yong-ho felt he needed to think twice about setting up a gambling room in the dungeon of the Mammon House. Let's keep going anyway. By now, the dungeon monsters at the entrance were removed already. Yong-ho walked towards Salami, bravely making the snorting mixed with sparks. The third floor was a gambling room. As Ophelia expected, Yong-ho passed several simplified arenas, rooms with roulettes, and lounges before standing before a tightly sealed door. Like the Garden of Life, Scathak's space, the third-floor gambling house was structured so that he could go down to the fourth floor without having to pass by the 12 spirits. In front of the sealed room was a large staircase leading down to the fourth floor. Alun, one of the 12 spirits and Mammon's escort knight, already died. However, Scathach told Yong-ho that Alun must have left behind her surrogate. For this reason, Yong-ho again ordered Skull and Salami to step back. He allowed only himself and his dungeon spirits to enter the room. At his order, Skull and Eligos opened the tightly closed door. The room was spacious and quiet. Yong-ho didn't need to throw a lighting device. The moment the door was opened, a soft light poured down from the ceiling. It was like moonlight. He stopped Skull from trying to walk ahead, then pulled Aemon out of the air. His greed naturally triggered as if he was breathing. Some of the colored smoke arising from him wrapped around the dungeon spirits, and the rest spread into every nook and cranny of the room. He took the first step. Darkness in the room and the light from the ceiling reacted to him. Every time he took one step, darkness was cleared away. The light from the ceiling illuminated the place where he stepped forward, as if to guide him. There was no such thing as a trap. Led by Catalina, the dungeon spirits began to follow him one by one, and when he finally reached the middle of the room, the door that was open wide closed smoothly. The light guiding him became stronger, while the other lights from all sides dimmed. It was like starlight that dimmed when the moonlight got brighter. The soft golden lights became one. It formed a lump of light, then took the shape of a human in no time. It was a blurry shape. However, Yong-ho could see it clearly. Golden hair and a red eye patch, Libra, one of Mammon's 12 spirits, Alun, who cuts the night. It was a beautiful scene. Standing up from the light, she breathed softly. Everything about her coincided with the woman in his memory. Despite her slender figure, he didn't think she was fragile at all. Rather, he felt she was strong, determined, and sharp. She opened her mouth, the king of greed who was finally returned. At that moment, Yong-ho knew that none of the previous masters of the House of Mammon could face Alun. She opened her eyes in response to his greed. Alun continued, "What you are facing now is a mere shadow of the old me. But don't worry, I am obviously Alun that cuts the night. And I, standing before you now, will think and judge the same way I do. On the day Mammon died, Alun also died. Moreover, Alun died ahead of Mammon. So, the Alun that was standing here was her ghost. She was a kind of alter ego she had left behind right before she went out of the labyrinth of greed lastly. But it was exactly what Alun said. She could not be classified as a mere ghost. Yong-ho felt like he faced the very Alun in his memory. Even the dungeon spirits realized that they were facing a legend, just like when they encountered Scathach and Gussian. In particular, Catalina seemed to have been more impressed than other spirits, perhaps because she shared with Alun her unique characteristics such as an escort knight and a lover. Catalina looked at her with a pious expression. "Well, it's a good introduction. Can you show me your face a little more clearly?" Alun said kindly. She wasn't necessarily as sharp as a sword. She, who had loved everything about Mammon, also loved him because he was Mammon's descendant. She wanted to face him kindly, as if she were his mother. Yong-ho took a couple of steps again to get closer to Alun. Although she was wearing an eye patch to cover her eyes, Alun had a mental vision. She could easily see through anything that ordinary people could not see. Alun gently caressed his cheeks. A smile came to her lips naturally. "You look like that person." He didn't need to ask who that person was. Withdrawing her hand, she took a step back. Once again, she took a look at him as a whole, then said brightly, "You're very attractive. I don't know how many generations have passed, but it was certain that a person's blood must be flowing in your body. And you seem to have inherited the blood of the incubus a lot." It must be the blood of the famous and powerful incubus family. Pardon. Yong-ho raised his voice before he knew it. The loon laughed gently and said, "Don't be too surprised. I can figure out this kind of stuff very easily." "How can you?" He blurred. He felt something was strange, but he thought maybe she was right. Above all, her voice was full of confidence. "It's been quite a while since you became the king of greed. I can feel gravity in you. You seem to be older than you look. And, wait a minute," he said, shaking his hand quickly. "First of all, I'm from the human world. I don't know my ancestors, but my father is just a normal human. It's only been about half a year since I became the master of the House of Mammon." Alun said in a strange tone. It was a familiar scene for Yong-ho. "Oh no, I can't believe my ears. You became the master only 6 months ago. Your blood was not mixed with an incubus." Remarkably embarrassed, Alun quickly looked at his lower body. Aside from her embarrassment, she blushed. He quickly covered his lower body with his hand, as if he was also embarrassed. He was sure why this scene was familiar to him. "Dang it, how can she be wrong?" Ophelia murmured, narrowing her eyes. Elagos leered at Catalina, while Skull looked at Catalina openly. Catalina was so shy at the moment. As if she was humiliated, she was at a loss of what to do, turning red. Put to shame, she lost their reverence, let alone mystery about her. In the same league as Alun, Catalina, who couldn't stand it anymore, covered her face with both hands. Likewise, Alun did the same. It took a lot of time for the two escort knights, who shared everything over 1,000 years, to regain their composure. "You, the king of greed who has finally returned." Her voice was elegant and beautiful, resonating hazily in the moonlight. It was truly fantasy itself. But Yong-ho said, knitting his brows, "Wait a minute. It seems unreasonable to start over from the beginning as if nothing happened." Not only Yong-ho, but also the dungeon spirits of the Mammon family looked at Alun with mixed feelings such as cold, compassion, and regret, etc. Alun curled her lips and said, "So mean." Grumbling a bit, Alun suddenly stretched out her hand, then pointed to Catalina, who was feeling shy like her. "Hey, come over here. Me, yes, you." Since she was singled out suddenly, Catalina blinked, embarrassed, then turned to Yong-ho as if to ask for his permission. When he nodded a bit, she scurried to Alun. Alun let out a long sigh. She quickly glanced at him, but he was not clear because she was wearing an eye patch. Then she put her lips to Catalina's long ears and whispered something. Then Catalina showed a reaction befitting her. She flapped her ears, as if startled, then nodded violently, looking at him. He was not sure what she was trying to express to him, but it was clear that her action bothered him a lot. Alun smiled and whispered into her ears again. As if she agreed completely, Catalina kept nodding. This time, Catalina whispered to Alun, "You're right, you're right." This time, Alun agreed excitedly. Yong-ho was extremely bothered. After all, Alun said something very important. "Oh, I just feel refreshed only now." Alun laughed. Catalina also laughed instinctively, then quickly curled her lips. Alun patted her on the shoulder and put her index finger in the middle of her lips. This time, Catalina raised her finger as Alun did, then nodded. It looked like they wanted to keep their conversation today to themselves. While Yong-ho was nervous, wondering about their conversation, Ophelia clicked her tongue. Elagos shook his head because he felt sympathetic to Yong-ho, and Skull just laughed. With a brighter expression now, Alun looked back at Yong-ho and said, "Don't look at me like that. What you see here is Alun's ghost. That's why she is more honest, simpler, and more childish. The real Alun is a beautiful and noble swordsman, so don't worry." Since Alun reacted so brazenly, it was hard for Yong-ho to respond properly. Catalina, trying to read his mind, quickly came to him and stood where she was, as if on cue. Alun spoke again right away. "I think I can stop playing with you. The power of my ghost has become so weakened. It seems it took much longer than I thought for the new King of Greed to appear. Let's get back to the main point now." Alun changed the atmosphere. Yong-ho felt her manner was distant now, though she looked very friendly to him a moment ago. "The fact that you are here means that you have been recognized by Skathash and Baphomet." The light in the room dimmed. The moonlight pouring toward Alun dimmed, but the starlight became brighter instead. Skathak's power is life. Baphomet's power is death. the number of light increased. However, the light could not drive out the darkness. The moonlight was eclipsed, and the starlight was too little to drive out the darkness. The starlight was buried in the darkness one by one, and the darkness in the room grew thicker. However, no one looked away. Everyone looked at Elune. There were others right next to her, but they didn't feel it. They felt as if there were only Elune and Yong-ho in the dark. Chapter 59. Libra Elune 4S. Elune's power is justice. However, justice is very hard to come by, contrary to what others think about it. Just like true perfection could not exist in this imperfect world, justice could not exist. So, it is like an ideal we have to just look to. Elune knew that her own justice was not true justice. It would rather rightly be called an indomitable conviction. My strength is like a will that never bends. It's like the courage to take a step toward the light, even in the dark where you can't look ahead at all. The starlight faded now. The dim moonlight was eclipsed by the darkness. Elune asked in the darkness, "If you want to back down, now is the time." But that's not an option. It was a pointless question. Yong-ho wouldn't have come here if he hadn't intended to challenge the test in the first place. Elune didn't delay any further. Okay, let's get started. Silence was added to the darkness. He couldn't see and hear anything anymore. He breathed. He couldn't feel it. It wasn't just the darkness that eclipsed the surroundings. What was Elune's test? Surely, was it to endure isolation created by darkness? It was not. He noticed that the test began. The sword of light poured down. After cutting through the darkness, it cut his chest. He instinctively backed down, but he couldn't avoid it. The terrible pain in his heart spread to his whole body. He was still in the dark. He couldn't feel his surroundings. Moreover, it was difficult for him to even concentrate. He felt regret now. The memories that he wanted to forget, the memories and feelings that had been dulled by time, began to come flooding back to him. It was a shock that surpassed the pain of the flesh. It was brief, but sharp enough for him to forget the pain. Elune did not stop. The sword of light poured out again. He couldn't escape it again. His shoulders were split, with blood gushing out from it. Even his blood was eclipsed by the darkness. He could not come to his senses. Mental and physical pain alternately raged in his body. He stumbled without hearing his own scream. Elune's ordeal, which came so suddenly, was so tough. Concentrate. You must set yourself right in the dark. You must end the confusion with a strong will. Armin shouted, but it didn't reach him. The darkness blocked Armin's voice. Yong-ho gasped for breath. The funeral came to his mind. The pain that had been buried in his heart tormented him. The little Yong-ho was crying sadly. The sword of light kept pouring down. He was hacked. He desperately moved his body, but he couldn't even tell the right side from the left. All he could do was to avoid her fatal attack. The darkness took away his sense of balance. Pain and confusion endlessly disturbed his concentration, which made him drift in a flood of emotions. It was almost impossible for him to erect 5 horns and release mana. Armin did not stop shouting. Armin shouted to him to stand tall in the dark with strong winds and greed. However, he could not produce the power of greed. It seemed that he couldn't even think about it. He was just being hacked in the darkness created by Elune. Aemon felt nervous. Aemon knew Elune. Elune was different from Skathak. Elune was much more resolute and cold-hearted. He could die at the end of this ordeal, little master. It was almost a desperate scream. Armin felt that his voice finally reached him. Armin was convinced that he was focusing in the dark, but it was too late. The sword of light cut his chest again. As he couldn't stand it, he sank to the floor. Armin called him again. He didn't answer his call. He raised his head. It was so dark that he could see the sword of bright light. He instinctively knew it would be his last moment. He didn't even know how much time passed. The time he wandered in the terrible darkness where Elune invited him was short, but he felt it was long. The sword of light poured out from overhead. Armin screamed. Yong-ho also clenched his fist. He called only one name, even at this moment when his memories and feelings were being hacked. Catalina. At that very moment, the darkness broke. It shattered and collapsed. The sword of light did not reach him. Yong-ho gasped for breath. He lifted his head, sweating. Elune, grasping the sword of light, was standing in the bright moonlight. Catalina was standing behind her back. She was aiming at Elune's neck with the sword of black mana. Moreover, it wasn't just Catalina's skull was standing before him. Hoo-hoo! Yong-ho laughed beyond the wreckage of the shattered darkness. All the wounds inflicted by the sword of light were fake, but the mental shock was real. Because of that, he felt the pain as if he had been cut by a real sword, but he still smiled. How could you? Elune asked in confusion. She asked Yong-ho, not Catalina, who was aiming at her neck. The purpose of this ordeal was to strengthen the will of the successor of the House of Mammon. Overcoming extreme confusion and darkness with strong conviction was the model answer. But Yong-ho didn't do it like that. The reason Elune stopped her sword was not because he overcame her ordeal. It was because Catalina, who was supposed to not know what was happening to him, aimed her sword at Elune. The darkness eclipsed not only Yong-ho, but also his dungeon spirits. Of course, there were differences. Unlike the darkness that eclipsed Yong-ho, it only blocked their movement. The dungeon spirits should not have known what was happening to Yong-ho. In fact, except for Catalina and Skull, the other spirits were only looking at Yong-ho and Elune alternately, as if they didn't know what had happened. How could you? Elune asked again. Wiping his cold sweat, he replied, Skathax told me I should fight you with dungeon spirits. Of course, Skathak didn't say it to him, with Elune's test in mind. In fact, he didn't recall Skathak's kind reminder from the beginning. Even now, he could reply like that because the fight was over. When he was in the dark, he lost himself. As Elune intended, he drifted in confusion and fear. But at the same time, he could feel it when he was thrown to the floor and in terrible isolation by the darkness. At that moment, he felt he was not alone. He knew that even in this darkness, there were his dungeon spirits, who got connected with himself. What came next was totally his own world. He couldn't hear Ammon's voice, but he focused. In the midst of being swept away by the drift of emotions, he never let go of his touch with the dungeon spirits, who were connected with him like a lifeline, and he finally moved. He conveyed a simple but strong will to Catalina and Skull. It was Catalina who responded first. The escort knight became a sword to protect her master. She broke the dark veil that Elune had unfolded, and Skull became a shield for its master. Elune opened her lips. Yong-ho couldn't specifically explain what he had done, but Elune already understood it. That was why she didn't withdraw her sword right away. The Elune standing here was her ghost. In other words, she was a replica that the real Elune had left behind just before she left the labyrinth of greed. Because of that, her emotions and memories were the same as hers back then, which synced with Yong-ho and made Elune silent. Some time passed after that. When he began to feel nervous, Elune withdrew the sword. She felt a bit dispirited, but she smiled kindly. It wasn't the model answer to my test, but you have overcome it anyway. The moonlight pouring from the ceiling became stronger. Yong-ho instinctively lifted the magic field on his left arm. It was giving off a golden gleam, next to blue and purple. Catalina and Skull naturally stepped back. Elune politely showed due manners to Yong-ho. She ended the ritual by transferring her power to him, power of anguish again. Last time Gusion and Kaiwan said that the source of the master's power is an incredibly powerful desire for lust. Ah, no, that's not true. Oh, it looks like a weak denial, not a strong one. Then, is it really true? Ophelia said, hurriedly covering her chest with both hands. Why the hell did she cover her chest while talking about it? Yong-ho looked around as if asking for help, but there was no one who could help him. Elagos gently cleared his throat, and Catalina didn't turn to Yong-ho at all. As always, Skull just laughed. Skull, Yong-ho and his dungeon spirits left Elune's room. They headed back to the upper floor with Salami and Skull's unit on standby. After saying goodbye to Yong-ho's party, Elune watched them leaving quietly. Since she transferred her power to him, she couldn't sustain herself anymore. Along with the dimming moonlight, her body turned more and more grey. Elunine. The flames of the red lotus arose near Elune, who was now almost translucent. Armon also overworked itself. But Armon couldn't help but see her last moment. Although it was nothing but her ghost, it was still Elune. Elune did not ask about what happened after she died, because she already knew the answer after learning about the current status of the Labyrinth of Greed and Skathak's request. To Yong-ho, Armon didn't say much. It was just content with staying with Elune. When her last moment came, it was Alun who opened his mouth first. I think that person, too, must have thought of us until the end. You bet. Aemon knew it too. Although Aemon didn't see Mammon's last moment, it remembered the moment when it got disconnected from its master. Mammon did not die in regret, anger, or fear. What he thought about until his last moment was his concern about the 12 spirits in Sitri. Well, I have to say goodbye to you once and for all. Armin could hardly see Alun's figure. Now, Alun turned to Armin. She smiled like Mammon did, and said, I hope the new king of greed is in your great hands, let alone the escort knight who resembles me. Instead of answering, Aemon nodded. Alun slowly closed her eyes and disappeared. The only thing left in the darkness of the night, where even the starlight disappeared, was the flame of the Red Lotus, my master, the great one who saved the demon world. With that faint call, Aemon also closed its eyes. The flames of the Red Lotus were flaring up fiercely and faded with the wind. Chapter 60. Embryo's Legacy 1. The King of Pride issued a declaration of war against the King of Envy. There were many who wanted to stop the King of Pride. The King of Fury expressed his opposition by deploying troops on the shore, but he was ignored. The King of Pride knew better than anyone else that this pacifist, stigmatized as the war fanatic, would not be able to strike himself first by crossing the sea irrationally. One of the 5 directors of the Dungeon Chamber of Commerce, or Rovas, called a man of Herculean power, uncharacteristically sent a gentle letter to the King of Oman. In the letter, he expressed humbly that the dungeon market did not want a direct war between them. The King of Oman also ignored this letter. After all, the dungeon market was nothing more than a motley of traders. They could not take a hard line to completely block their dealings with the King of Pride, for it meant that the dungeon market would be directly involved in the 2 kings' actions. Other kings would never stand by the arrogance of the dungeon market. There was also some movement behind the scenes. For instance, the King of Envy tried to desperately stop the breakout of an all-out war that might bring about a total catastrophe, but all such efforts were in vain. The King of Pride made the decision. As the most arrogant king under the sky, he did not know the option of breaking his will. A full-out war began. The King of Pride was in no hurry. His offensive was slow but persistent. The King of Envy's army was defeated. The dungeons at the border were destroyed and captured. But it was only a skirmish of the war. The King of Envy's defeat was not fatal. Those who watched their battle didn't think the King of Pride won decisively, but some of them thought the battle was already over. Among them was the King of Envy. The King of Lust walked across his or her harem. The dungeon spirits and contractor witches, exhausted from the frenzied feast that lasted for 49 days, were lying here and there, naked in various places in the harems. The King of Lust was both a child and an adult. He was both he and she, and a pure virgin as well as a madman addicted to sex. As someone who could freely choose men, women, and children, his look didn't matter to him at all. The King of Lust walked alone in the palace where everyone was asleep. On the 49th day, the king was a child, so today, on the 59th day, he was an adult. He was a handsome young man. His white skin like a marble was a sharp contrast with his black hair. With the horns of a lewd goat, he entered the Devil King's room in the deepest part of the harem. Unlike all the places in the harem, that place welcomed the king with constant purity. He felt good when his bare feet touched the floor. The image of the King of Lust was reflected like a mirror on the floor made of smooth obsidian. The King of Lust enjoyed the last fun before facing the hustle and bustle that called him to this place. The King of Lust sat on the throne. It was as soft as a virgin's skin, as comfortable as a woman's breast, and as hard as a man's muscle. He looked into the air with blurry eyes. Hey, long time no see. It's been almost 30 years since I came back here, right? His little whispering was transmitted far away through mana. The magic, called the Watcher's Eye, connected a distant being with the King of Lust, Asmodeus. It was an old man's voice. The King of Lust closed his eyes and faced the images that came to his mind. He was a thin and tall old man. Both his white beard and hair were long. The clothes he was wearing were more than high quality, even from the king's point of view. But all these things were hidden by one thing. It was the old man's eyes. His fully raised eyes reflected ferocious emotions. All right, Leviathan. The king of lust called the old man's name. Calling each other's name was unusual to them, because there were few who could call the king's name. The king of envy. He caught his breath once. He seemed to have calmed down his hot temper as much as possible, but his voice was trembling. You probably know it. That little kid, king of pride, has attacked me. How ungrateful he is. He surely heard from his father about our special services, right? Perhaps, if there had been any dungeon spirit near the king of envy at that moment, he would have killed it. The king of envy had terrible emotional power. The king of lust asked with a sigh, what did we do for him? At that moment, the king of envy held his breath. It wasn't because he couldn't remember what to say. He was upset. He sprang to his feet and cried out in anger, we saved the demon world. Saved the demon world. Without our help, the demon world as it is now would not have existed. It can't exist, it can't exist, even that little king wouldn't have been born. The king of lust laughed again and shook his head. No, Leviathan, we didn't save the demon world, he saved it. It was Mammon who saved the demon world. Absolutely we didn't. We are just petty cowards. Did you already forget why we covered up what we had done on that day, Asmodeus? Did envy change you like that? Or was it because you could take possession of envy? That was what the king of lust wanted to ask him, but he didn't. Instead, he asked, Leviathan, what do you want me to do? The king of envy let out a harsh breath. He barely calmed down and opened his mouth, but he spoke harshly, as if he could not overcome his hard feelings. Help me. Let's defeat that arrogant little king together. We had better have him get on his knees under our feet and lick our shoes. We're going to share all his possessions. The king of lust let his words in one ear and out the other. Then he shook his shoulders and said with a smile, Leviathan, the war has just begun. As the person who spent that day with you, I wish you good luck. Don't expect more than that from me. I don't want to use my sword against you, sword demon Asmodeus. He was once the greatest swordsman in the demon world. The king of envy clenched his fists, trembling in anger. He couldn't stand it when anybody despised him, but he had to put up with it. If he made even the king of lust his enemy when he was fighting the king of pride, everything would be ruined. The king of envy clenched his teeth. However, he couldn't help but vent out his anger. You will regret it. The king of lust laughed again at his warning. It wasn't his ridicule of the king, who was gripped by the sin of envy rather than overcoming it. It was obviously his self-mocking laugh. Yes, you are right, Leviathan. I will regret it just like I did after that day. He would keep regretting it. But nobody can't put back the past. It was impossible to change again. The king of lust accepted his depression without suppressing it. Then he leaned over the throne. As always, he regretted what he had done in the past. Ho, ho. Inside a noisy bar, Urea, who, with her chin resting, was sitting on a high table that she could barely stand on tiptoes, shouted with a sad expression as if she was about to cry at any moment. She was already crying. Baduk, sitting right next to her, clenched its fists and stared at the table with its eyes bloodshot. The bones and chicken vouchers it had collected so far were on the table. It was the chips piled up on the table that first attracted Baduk, but now it couldn't afford to look back at them. Ophelia looked down at the two beyond the table. She asked, waving her clenched fist gently, Really, don't you regret it? Do you know what will happen if you lose again? Ophelia was sweet enough but cold-hearted at the same time. Uriah's clear eyes like glass beads trembled without any reason. Oh, my Uriah bit her lips. She wanted to run away right now. She wished all this was a nightmare, so when she woke up, she could find herself lying on a warm and cozy bed. Bark, bark. Holding her hand, Baduk barked violently. It was just barking. Uriah could understand it, which was something like this. You should not back down. Think about how much we lost. If you give up here, we don't have anything left. Don't give up. You can make it, I know. But Baduk nodded strongly. Its eyes filled with conviction gave Uriah strength. Ho! Uriah shouted, looking straight at Ophelia. Baduk also stared at Ophelia glaringly. Ophelia rolled her eyes to the side. She moved her eyebrows a few times, as if she got nervous, and said again, Really? You don't want to change it, Holbark? Noticing her weakness, Uriah and Baduk shouted triumphantly. Ophelia sighed out loud. She let her arms drop as if she was disappointed. Then she opened her fists in front of Yuria and Baduk that were extremely tense. Okay, let me show you my card. Yuria's heart froze. Baduk couldn't even breathe properly. No matter how many times they looked at it, there were only 2 dice on Ophelia's palm. All right, these are all mine now, right? Ophelia spoke cheerfully and picked up all 5 pebbles on the edge of the table. It was a gift that Yong-ho bought for Yuria after he returned from the human world. There were 5 pebbles with multiple colors. Actually, the gift was Yuria's most cherished treasure in the world that she didn't even take out even when playing with Bauk. Stiffening on the spot, Yuria was frozen and couldn't say anything. Tears flowed down her soft cheeks.